Bob Odenkirk hits theaters this weekend as a bunch of mobsters hit Bob Odenkirk and Nobody, and I've got your review right now. Hello everybody, I'm Dan Murrell here with my review of Nobody, a new action film that's hitting the theaters that are open around the country this weekend. We'll also talk about how else you might see it in the very near future. The movie stars Bob Odenkirk as Hutch Mansell, just an everyday anonymous suburbanite who's trapped in a dead-end job and an everyday routine. But when a home invasion unlocks a hidden part of him, he goes out for a one-man revenge tour that ends up snowballing into an all-out war with Yulian, a Russian gangster played by Alexei Serebryakov. The movie co-stars Connie Nielsen as Hutch's wife, a critical but underwritten role. There's also Christopher Lloyd as Hutch's retired father, and Riza as a colleague of Hutch who shares information with him from his old life via radio. So when you look at the setup of this movie, you've got unconventional action star in Bob Odenkirk, you've got retired everyman with a hidden skill set, you've got a quest for revenge, you've got Russian mobsters. If this sounds a little bit like John Wick, it's because it's a lot like John Wick. This is basically John Wick plus Bob Odenkirk, and thankfully, minus the dog. A lot of Nobody's key creative talent was also the key creative talent behind John Wick. You start with the writer of the film, Derek Kolstad, who wrote the screenplays for John Wick's 1 through 3. The producer is David Leitch, who also was a producer and also directed some of the first John Wick film. And then when you talk about the look and the action of the film, you have Ilya Naishuller at the helm. He's directed one other film, which is Hardcore Henry, a movie that came out a few years ago that I actually liked the concept of, but I felt like it was a little bit lacking in execution only because it was all first-person perspective. It looks cool from a technical perspective. It was great. By the end of the movie, I had a little bit of a headache, but I couldn't really take away from the style that was brought to it. So you have people that were heavily involved in other action franchises, including John Wick, bringing a lot of style, but also a lot of familiar beats to the movie. And I think in lesser hands in front of the camera, this could have felt like a very watered-down retread of John Wick. Sometimes it still flirts a little close to that, but you have, first of all, a star in Bob Odenkirk. He's also a producer on the film. You could tell he was very invested, not just in its success as the person in front of the camera, but with the presence behind the camera. And he brings a lot of his own sensibilities, the things that have worked really well for him in shows like Better Call Saul, most famously. It's this intensity mixed with this sort of wry, dark sense of humor that he brings to the character. This is probably the least humorous role that you've seen Bob Odenkirk in, or at least if you're only familiar with him from Breaking Bad. He's brought a lot more seriousness into his career as he's gone on. But Bob Odenkirk action star is not something that I think that I would ever have thought would be a phrase that enters my vocabulary. Sometimes when you have stars who aren't known for action do action sequences, it doesn't look right on camera. Or like Liam Neeson, you have to do 14 cuts just to get them to jump over a fence. But Bob Odenkirk really takes this role on with great gusto, and you could tell he did the work. He did the training. So from both a performance and a physicality angle, Bob Odenkirk really went the extra mile, and so much of the movie is on his shoulders that if he'd been phoning it in or if it just wasn't a good fit, then the movie wouldn't have worked. But because I do buy him in this role, and I do buy him as a physical threat, then I bought the movie and I bought the premise of the movie. And then the action. I mean, this is really the centerpiece of a movie like this, is how is the action? And I have to say the action is fairly well staged through the first 2 acts of the movie. You know, the sequences are good. Nothing really dropped my jaw like I've seen in movies like John Wick, which, as I mentioned, this movie is very similar to in many ways. However, when you get to the 3rd act, there are a couple of sequences and then a climactic action sequence in particular that had me oohing and aahing as I was sitting on my couch watching the movie, which means if I had been in a theater with a crowd, I would probably be hooting and hollering. And I think that if you are lucky enough to have a theater near you and it is safe for you to do so, this is going to be a movie that what capacity crowds are allowed in theaters right now, I think it will be an enjoyable watching experience. There are also a couple beats that I didn't even know I needed in my life. There's there's one third act beat in particular that just left me with such a stupid grin on my face. It's never something that I would have imagined I would want to see in a movie or could want to see in a movie or whatever happened in a movie, but it just left me grinning, and I think it will leave a lot of other people grinning, particularly people that are around my age. It's just a really nice touch that I didn't see coming, that is really the most memorable thing of the movie for me, along with Bob Odenkirk's performance, which I think is very strong as well. What you have with Nobody is a movie that doesn't really transcend on the page, but when we talk about the cast being able to transcend the material, the cast of Nobody transcends the material, and it goes from a second-rate, watered-down version of a movie you've already seen to still a version of a movie you've already seen, but with some unique performances and with a real pull to it. You really are rooting for this guy. There is some mystery in trying to figure out what's going on with him, even though you don't really have to think too hard to figure out what it is. But I liked this journey, and I liked this character, and that's so much of what an action movie is. You have to have a leading man and a leading character that you're rooting for, and so I think there's way more in this movie that does work than that doesn't work, or is just kind of there. So this is a movie that in a different universe, I can honestly say, with a different team behind and particularly in front of the camera, I could sort of shrug my shoulders at and go like, you know what, I've seen it before. And you may very well see the movie and think the same thing, because it does border on that, but stick with it to the end, and I think you're gonna find some really fun, at least a few fun little moments. This is gonna be a recommendation for me for Nobody. We are in a weird situation though. It does hit theaters this weekend, so if you have a theater open near you, you could go see it if you can find a safe screen time and capacity allows. This is also part of the deal that AMC struck with Universal last year, where Universal has the option to, after 17 days of release, make this movie available for you to rent premium video on demand for about $20 and watch at home. So if you can't make it to a theater, keep an eye and an ear out, because 17 days from this Friday, the 26th, it may very well be that you can rent this movie and watch it at home, because we are still in this very hybrid model of how people are watching films. So don't count Nobody out just yet. If you can't get to a theater, you may be able to see it in a much shorter time period than 90 days. You may see it in about 2.5 weeks. Either way, if you can go to a theater and it's safe, if you decide to watch it at home, I enjoyed it. I think you'll enjoy it too, particularly if you're a fan of the action genre, if you like the John Wick films, if you're a fan of Bob Odenkirk or a fan of Better Call Saul, if you're a fan of the people that are in the cast. Everybody acquits themselves pretty well. So not an A+ experience, but a great way to spend a very tight 90 minutes. It is a 90-minute film. It's just as long as it needs to be. And all of those factors kept me on board. So it is a recommendation for Nobody. Are you excited? Is there another movie coming out that you're excited to see? Let me know down in the comments below. It's great to be reviewing more movies more regularly. They're starting to churn out release dates. Movies are moving up to get released sooner. People are heading back into theaters. LA theaters are partially back open. New York theaters partially back open. I'm keeping my fingers crossed that everything keeps going the direction that it's going. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to see even more of what I'm up to, you can check me out on Patreon at patreon.com/Dan Murrell. And don't forget to check out my podcast, All My Movies, where I take a movie off the shelf every week and talk about it. This week, we're breaking down Man of Steel, which will be very interesting to do in light of Zack Snyder's Justice League, which just came out. So check out those links below. And thank you so much for watching me here. Later today, I will be doing my weekly chart show where I am talking about Raya and the Last Dragon staying on top for a third week. As I mentioned, the LA market's opening and numbers are starting to rise at the box office. So we'll break down all of that. Avatar extending its lead now as the biggest movie of all time worldwide. Lots of charts, lots of numbers. Stay tuned then. But until then, I'll see you next time.